Under the soft golden lights of the company's grand hall, laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. It was the annual celebration, and everyone from interns to executives was dressed in their best. The millionaire, Mr. Harrison, stood at the center of attention as always. Tall, commanding, and sharp-eyed, he was known not just for his wealth but for his harsh tongue and sharp jokes at the expense of those who worked under him. People laughed at his comments not because they were funny, but because no one dared to stay silent when the boss mocked someone. Among the crowd stood Daniel, a quiet young man in his late 20s. He worked as a junior accountant, always punctual, polite, and invisible to most people. He never raised his voice, never drew attention, and most people barely remembered he was even in the room. Tonight, though, he had become the target. Mr. Harrison, scanning the crowd with a glass of wine in his hand, noticed Daniel standing quietly near the wall. "You there, Daniel?" the millionaire said loudly, his voice cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to look at the shy employee. Daniel straightened nervously, not sure why he had been called out. "Tell me," Harrison continued, pointing toward the grand piano in the corner of the hall. "Do you know how to play that thing, or do you just count numbers all day?" His words made the guests chuckle. Daniel hesitated. He did know how to play, but it had been years since he touched a piano in front of people. Still, before he could answer, Harrison smirked and added, "I dare you to play for us right here, right now." The room broke into laughter. Whispers darted across the hall. Some people grinned with cruel excitement, expecting Daniel to make a fool of himself. Others exchanged glances, thinking it was unfair, but no one said anything. Daniel's heart pounded. He could feel every eye on him, the heat rising to his face. He wanted to refuse, but Harrison's dare was more like a command if he said no. He would forever be remembered as the coward who couldn't even try. Yet if he said yes, he risked humiliation in front of the entire company. Harrison leaned back in his chair, confident that Daniel would stutter and back away. To him, it was just another way to show power, to remind his employees who held control. The piano was not there for serious music. It was just a decoration. No one expected it to be touched. The hall grew quiet. Waiting for Daniel's response, he glanced at the piano, its polished black surface reflecting the lights like still water. His mother's face flashed in his memory. She had once told him, "Never let fear decide for you." "Daniel," his throat tightened. He took a deep breath. "I can try," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the vast room. The laughter grew louder at his timid answer. Harrison clapped his hands sarcastically. "Excellent, ladies and gentlemen. We are about to witness history. Daniel the accountant becoming Daniel the pianist." Daniel's legs felt heavy as he walked toward the piano, each step echoing like thunder in his mind. Whispers followed him, some mocking, some curious. His hands trembled not from lack of skill, but from the pressure of so many eyes watching. He had played piano for years in secret, but never in front of a crowd like this, never for people waiting for him to fail. As he reached the piano bench, he sat down slowly. Brushing his fingers against the keys, the cold ivory felt both familiar and terrifying. The room's laughter faded into silence. Everyone leaned in, waiting. "Behind him, Mr." Harrison sipped his wine, a smug smile across his face. He thought the game was already won. Daniel would press a few wrong keys, the crowd would laugh, and the party would move on with Harrison as the clever victor. But Daniel wasn't thinking about Harrison anymore. His mind was racing back to his childhood living room, his mother's gentle hands guiding his on the keys, the way music had once been his escape from the world's cruelty. At that moment, he realized he had a choice. He could give in to fear and play poorly, fulfilling their cruel expectations, or he could let the music speak for him, even if it meant risking everything. The hall was waiting. His boss was smirking, and his heart was beating louder than any drum. The dare that was meant to humiliate him had now become a test, not of his ability to play, but of his courage to stand tall in the face of ridicule. And as Daniel's trembling fingers hovered above the keys, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Would he collapse under pressure, or would he rise and shock them all? Daniel sat at the piano bench, and for a moment the world felt too large. The lights above him seemed brighter, the silence heavier. His hands hovered above the keys but refused to press down. The whispers behind him grew louder, each one sharp like a needle against his skin. Some voices mocked softly. Others chuckled as if waiting for the disaster. His throat went dry, his chest tightened. He could feel his boss's gaze burning into him from across the room. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair with that same smug grin. Swirling the wine in his glass, he had no doubt this would end badly. In his mind, Daniel was just a number cruncher, a quiet man with no spark. This dare was supposed to remind everyone that the millionaire was untouchable. Even in games, Daniel's mind, however, was a storm. He thought about standing up, shaking his head and walking away. Maybe he could pretend it was just a joke. Maybe people would forget by tomorrow. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. If he walked away now every time he entered the office, the memory would return. Every chuckle he heard in the hallway would feel like it was about him. The weight of humiliation would follow him like a shadow. He pressed one key lightly just to feel the sound. A faint note slipped into the air, not enough to make music, but enough for the crowd to notice. The whispers stopped for a second, then someone laughed. "He can't even start," another voice added with a sneer. "This will be fun." Daniel swallowed hard, his palms sweaty. He rubbed them quickly against his trousers. His whole body tense. For a second he looked at the exit. The tall glass doors that led out into the night. How easy it would be to leave and escape all of this. But then another memory pulled him back. He was 12 years old again, sitting in a small living room, his mother's hands guiding his on the keys of an old second-hand piano. "Don't be afraid of mistakes," she had whispered. "Music is not about perfection, it's about heart." Her voice, soft and kind, echoed in his mind now, stronger than the voices around him. He took a deep breath, the air sharp in his lungs. The noise of the room blurred as he focused only on the piano before him, the shine of the black surface, the smooth touch of the keys. He knew this instrument. It wasn't his enemy. It was his oldest friend. Still, fear clung to him. His hands trembled. The weight of hundreds of eyes pressed down on his shoulders. He imagined them laughing. He imagined hitting the wrong key and the whole hall roaring with cruel amusement. His heart pounded faster, faster. It felt impossible. Then he thought of something else. The nights after his mother passed away. When he was alone, the piano had been his only comfort. He had poured his grief into the notes, and somehow the music had held him together. If he could do that in the darkness of his room, maybe he could do it here. The crowd grew restless, some people shifting, others whispering again. "Come on, play already," someone muttered loudly. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He told himself quietly, almost like a prayer. Just one note, then another, just like before. He opened his eyes and looked straight ahead. No longer at the exit, not at Mr. Harrison, not at the curious faces waiting to see him fall. He focused only on the piano. His trembling hands settled on the keys. The cold ivory felt solid, real, grounding him. He pressed down gently, this time letting the sound carry. A clear note rang out in the silence, crisp and strong. The room went quiet instantly. The laughter faded. People leaned closer, waiting. Something was changing in the air, but inside, Daniel was still nervous. Every beat of his heart reminded him how much was at stake. If he failed, this moment would be carved into memory forever. Yet there was also a spark, a small flame pushing against the fear, urging him forward. He glanced once more at Mr. Harrison, who smirked, clearly still expecting failure. Daniel looked away quickly, realizing this wasn't about proving something to his boss. This was about proving something to himself. He could either stay the quiet man everyone ignored, or he could let them see who he really was. With trembling fingers, he prepared to play again. The nervousness was still there, but it was joined now by something else. Determination. His breath slowed. His focus sharpened. The voices around him melted away. For the first time that evening, Daniel wasn't just the shy employee in the corner. He was a man about to make a choice, to either let fear define him or to let the music speak for him. The keys beneath his hands waited, silent and patient. The crowd leaned in, and the next moment would decide everything. Daniel's hands rested on the keys, his fingers trembling like leaves in the wind. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The silence in the hall was so heavy it felt like the whole world was waiting. Then slowly, he pressed the first chord. A soft sound filled the air, gentle yet clear. It floated across the hall like a whisper. The laughter that had been buzzing just moments before vanished. Every eye fixed on him. Every breath seemed to pause. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the rush of the sound he had created. The first notes were simple, nothing grand, but they carried a strange kind of honesty, a quiet truth. It was not the shaky attempt everyone expected. It was real music, fragile but beautiful. Like the first drop of rain after a long dry season, the room froze in surprise. He pressed on, another note, then another, his hands remembering what his heart had long feared it had forgotten. The melody began to take shape. It was not perfect, but it was alive. Each sound rang out, filling the hall with something no one expected. Daniel could still feel the nervousness in his chest, but with every key he pressed, it weakened. Replaced by a rising confidence, the piano was no longer just wood and strings. It was his voice, his shield, his way of speaking without words. At the back of the hall, Mr. Harrison tilted his head, the smirk fading ever so slightly. He had expected broken notes, awkward pauses, and a flood of embarrassment. Instead, he heard something that pulled his attention, something he couldn't dismiss with a laugh. The crowd was the same. Moments ago, they had been whispering jokes, nudging each other, waiting for failure. Now they leaned forward, some with parted lips, some with furrowed brows, trying to understand how the shy accountant had produced such a sound. Daniel's fingers moved carefully. Not fast, not showy, but with meaning. He was still nervous. But as the notes spread through the room, he remembered what music had always been for him. A place to hide, a place to heal, a way to remember his mother. She had once told him, "Every key is a doorway, play it with honesty, and people will hear your heart." And now they were hearing it. The soft tune began to gather strength. The hall itself seemed to lean closer. The clinking glasses had stopped. No one dared speak. The quiet melody was fragile, and no one wanted to break it. It was the kind of silence that only true music could command. Daniel kept his eyes on the keys, not daring to look up. If he saw their faces, he might falter, but he felt their silence, and it pushed him further. His fingers found the pattern again, his hands warming, the flow returning like an old friend who had never really left. Inside him, fear still whispered, telling him one wrong note could ruin it all, but another voice rose stronger, reminding him why he played in the first place. It wasn't for them. It wasn't for Mr. Harrison, it was for himself. For the boy who once sat at the piano with his mother, for the man who had kept his music hidden out of shame. Tonight it was his choice to let it live. The first notes had been cautious, almost shy, but now they carried a pulse. Steady and sure, people in the hall exchanged glances. No one laughed, no one mocked, they listened, some in disbelief, some in awe. Even the waiters carrying trays slowed their steps. Unwilling to break the moment, Daniel felt his chest loosen with each chord. As if he had been holding his breath for years and was finally exhaling, the music grew. Not louder, but deeper. It filled corners of the hall that words could never reach. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. Surprised by her own tears, another man shook his head slowly, as if asking himself how he had never known this side of Daniel. Mr. Harrison's smirk was gone now, replaced by something unreadable, his eyes sharp, his hand still on his glass. But he was no longer amused. Daniel's nervousness had not disappeared completely, but it was no longer chains holding him down. It had transformed into energy, into a fire that guided his hands, each note stronger than the last. He was not just playing music, he was revealing himself, a part of him that had been hidden beneath numbers, files and silence, a part that no one at the company had ever seen. And as the last echo of the first passage drifted into the air, the crowd remained utterly still, hanging on to whatever would come next. Daniel took another deep breath, his heart pounding, but this time, it was not out of fear. It was out of something greater. The realization that he had them now, all of them, their attention, their silence, their hearts, and with that, he moved into the next passage, letting the music take over. The first note, the one meant to mock him, had instead changed everything. And though the night had only just begun, Daniel already knew something inside him had shifted forever. The melody flowed like water, soft and steady. Daniel's fingers moved with growing confidence, and though the fear had not fully left him, something new had taken its place. The music was pulling him away from the room, away from the stairs and into a world that only he could see. His eyes closed for a moment, and the sound of the piano carried him back into memories he had kept locked deep inside. He was no longer in the hall under the sharp gaze of Mr. Harrison. He was in a small, cozy living room, the curtains thin and letting in the evening sun, the walls worn but warm with love. And in that room sat his mother, smiling gently as she leaned over him, guiding his little hands on the same kind of keys. She had been the one to teach him patience, to tell him that music was not about being perfect but about speaking from the soul. Every note he touched now echoed her voice. Every chord brought back her face. The crowd did not know this. They only heard the beauty of the tune, but Daniel felt more than that. He felt the weight of his loss and the warmth of her memory rising through the notes. When his mother passed away, the piano had become both his comfort and his wound. For years he had played in secret late at night when no one could hear. It was his way of keeping her close, his way of refusing to let go of the bond they shared. Now in front of so many eyes, that hidden part of him was pouring out freely. The melody shifted, growing richer, like a voice that trembled at first but then spoke with certainty. The music filled the room with something unspoken, something even words could not carry. People began to lean closer, drawn in without even knowing why. A waiter holding a tray stopped in his steps, afraid to disturb the sound. Two women in elegant dresses exchanged a look, one of them wiping the corner of her eye quickly. The room, once full of laughter and arrogance, now sat in reverent silence. It was not just skill they were hearing. It was honesty, raw and unguarded. Daniel could feel the burn of tears pressing at the back of his eyes, but he kept playing. The notes carried his grief, his love, his loneliness, and his resilience. The melody rose, then softened, like waves against the shore, carrying everyone along with him. His mother's face stayed with him, the way she laughed, the way she hummed while he played as a boy. He remembered her telling him, "Music is the part of you no one can take away." And in that moment, he knew she had been right. Even Mr. Harrison, who had started this as a cruel game, sat frozen, his glass of wine untouched in his hand. The tune pulled at something buried in him too, something he had long ago forgotten. As a boy, he too had once touched piano keys, dreamed of music before he gave it all up for power and money. Now hearing Daniel, he felt an ache, a sting of envy mixed with shame. Daniel, unaware of the storm inside his boss, continued to let the music guide him. Every note he played seemed to peel away the shy shell everyone thought he lived in, revealing the truth of who he was, not just an accountant, not just a quiet man, but someone with a soul deep enough to carry sorrow and joy into sound. The longer he played, the more the room changed. No one whispered anymore, no one smirked. They were trapped in the world Daniel had built with his music, a world of memory, pain, and love, and though he had been nervous when he started, now he felt strangely powerful. Not in the way Mr. Harrison had power, but in a way that mattered more. His heart beat in time with the melody. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, and he forgot that this had ever been a dare meant to humiliate him. It no longer mattered who had pushed him to the piano, because in this moment it was his stage, his truth. As he reached the middle of the piece, the music swelled, lifting the hearts of those listening. It was as if they too were being carried into Daniel's memories, feeling the love of a mother they had never met, sharing the weight of his loss without needing to know the details. Music had the power to cross barriers, and tonight, it was happening right before their eyes. Daniel pressed the next keys with strength, his trembling gone. His voice, the one he had kept hidden for years, was speaking now in every note, and the people in the hall, whether rich or poor, powerful or ordinary, had no choice but to listen. The millionaire had dared him as a joke. But what Daniel gave them was no joke, it was truth, pure and unshaken. And though the night was far from over, it was already clear that something inside that room had shifted forever. Mr. Harrison sat still in his chair, the glass of wine in his hand forgotten when he had dared Daniel to play. He had expected clumsy hands and awkward noise. He had expected laughter and humiliation, but instead the music poured into the room like something alive, and with each note it reached deeper into him, breaking through walls he thought he had built long ago. The millionaire had once been a boy who loved music. People in his company did not know this, but years ago, before the money, before the power, Harrison had sat at a piano too. His father had wanted him to study business, to learn numbers and deals. But as a child, Harrison had loved the sound of the keys. He had dreamed of becoming a pianist. Yet when he was old enough, he traded music for ambition. He left behind the soft glow of the stage for the hard shine of wealth. And slowly, he told himself that music was nothing but a waste of time. Now listening to Daniel, those buried memories returned. The young boy he used to be stirred inside him. The melody seemed to speak directly to the past he had tried to forget. Each note was like a mirror showing him not only Daniel's soul, but also his own regrets. He shifted in his chair, suddenly uncomfortable. The smirk that had been so steady on his face was gone. He could not hide behind arrogance anymore. The music made it impossible. It stripped him bare without asking permission. Around him the guests were entranced. Some were smiling softly. Others were blinking away tears. No one dared to speak. Harrison looked at their faces and realized he was not the only one feeling something powerful. Daniel, the quiet accountant, had managed to do what Harrison, with all his money and speeches, never could. He had captured every single person in the room with nothing but a piano. For the first time in years, Harrison felt small. He had built towers of glass and steel. He had filled his life with riches. He had bought respect and forced loyalty. But none of it carried the weight of what he was hearing now. As the melody deepened, Harrison's throat tightened. He remembered the nights when he had secretly played in his room, when his hands were young and eager. He remembered how alive he had felt back then, how free, and then he remembered the day he gave it all up. The day he told himself dreams did not feed a man, only money did. From that moment he chased power, and though he gained the world, something inside him went silent. Now watching Daniel, he realized that silence had been broken, but not by him, by someone he had thought beneath him. A man he barely noticed in the office, a man he had mocked in front of everyone. The shame burned in him. He had set the stage for humiliation. But instead he was the one feeling exposed, and yet strangely, along with shame came awe. The music swirled, filling every corner of the hall, and Harrison leaned forward slightly without even realizing it. His heart was beating faster, and for a moment he was not the powerful millionaire. He was just a boy again, hearing the sound that once made him believe in beauty. He tried to swallow his pride, to tell himself it was just a trick of the moment, but he couldn't. The truth was undeniable. Daniel was gifted, not just technically skilled, but filled with the kind of emotion that turned notes into stories. Harrison's chest ached, not only because of what he was hearing, but because he knew he had lost something precious long ago. Something money could not replace. He had mocked Daniel for being small and quiet, but now he saw that the man carried a strength he himself no longer had, the strength to be true. Guests began to clap softly as Daniel's playing grew richer, and Harrison's hands twitched. He wanted to clap too, but pride held him back. He sat frozen, caught between two worlds, the world of the millionaire who mocked weakness and the world of the boy who once dreamed of music. For the first time in many years, tears threatened at the corner of his eyes. He blinked them away quickly, not wanting anyone to see, but inside he knew. The music had touched something no amount of wealth had ever reached. When Daniel shifted into a new passage, lighter and brighter, Harrison felt his chest loosen. It was like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was hope, and it shook him even more. Because hope was something he had stopped believing in a long time ago. He leaned back finally, his hand gripping the glass tightly. Not to drink, but to anchor himself. He had dared Daniel to fail, but Daniel had dared to reveal himself instead. And that act had struck the millionaire harder than any insult, harder than any loss. As the music filled the room, Harrison understood something he had never admitted before. Money could buy silence, respect, fear, but it could never buy what Daniel had just given them, a piece of his soul, raw and unpolished. The millionaire sat there, humbled and shaken, and though he did not yet show it to the others, he knew the night had already changed him. Something inside him had cracked, and through that crack, the sound of music was pouring back into his life. The melody rose higher, like a bird stretching its wings, and every person in the room leaned in as if afraid to miss a single note. Daniel's hands moved faster now, but not rushed. Each touch was careful, every sound deliberate. The music filled the grand hall in waves, rising and falling like a heartbeat. He was no longer trembling, no longer afraid of the eyes that watched him. The piano had become his world, and in that world fear had no place. His fingers glided over the keys with a freedom he had not felt in years, and the song carried him, lifting him out of the shadows where he had lived quietly all this time. Then slowly he began to guide the piece toward its ending. The notes softened, becoming tender as if they were whispers meant for each person in the room alone. The brightness of the earlier passage faded into something gentle, sorrowful, and deeply human. It was the kind of sound that reminded people of moments they had lost, of people they still longed for, of dreams they had put aside in the crowd. A woman pressed a hand over her mouth, holding back a sob. Another man in a suit shifted uncomfortably, his eyes glistening though he tried to hide it. Even the waiters stood frozen, the trays balanced in their hands as they listened. No one wanted to break the fragile beauty of the moment. Daniel felt his chest ache. The song had always been a memory of his mother. But now it was more than that. It was everything he had never said, every quiet pain, every lonely night, every hidden dream, all spilling out through the keys. He let it flow until his arms felt heavy, until his throat was tight, until there was nothing left to give. And then came the final flourish, his fingers pressing the last few chords with all the strength in his heart. The sound rang out sharp and clear, then softened into a fading echo. hanging in the air like the last light of day before night falls. When the final note ended, silence took over. Not the cruel silence of doubt, but the heavy silence of awe, the kind that clings to the skin. No one moved, no one breathed. The music had ended, but the spell it cast was still alive. Daniel sat frozen, his hands still resting on the keys, afraid to look up, afraid to see their faces. The silence stretched on and his heart pounded. Did they hate it? Did he embarrass himself? He had given them everything, and now he waited like a man waiting for judgment, and then it happened, a single clap, sharp and echoing. It came from the back of the hall. Then another followed and another until suddenly the room exploded in applause. People rose from their seats clapping, cheering, some even whistling. The sound was thunder compared to the silence that had come before. Daniel lifted his head, his eyes wide. He had expected laughter, maybe pity, but never this. He saw faces smiling, hands clapping with genuine respect. He even saw tears on cheeks, strangers moved by his song. His chest swelled with something he had not felt in years. Pride, not the shallow pride of victory, but the deep pride of being seen for who he truly was. Mr. Harrison did not clap right away. He sat frozen, his eyes locked on Daniel, his mind still lost in the storm the music had stirred. For the first time in years, he could not think of a word to say. He could not hide behind wealth or arrogance. Because the truth was too clear, he had tried to break Daniel, but Daniel had risen instead. Finally, even Harrison's hands began to move. Slowly at first, then stronger. He clapped with everyone else, though his applause felt heavier, weighed down by the shame of his earlier mockery. Daniel stood slowly, his legs shaky, and bowed his head slightly in thanks. The clapping grew louder, filling the hall like a wave crashing on the shore. He could barely believe it was real. A man who had always kept his gift hidden was now standing in front of people who finally understood. The emotions in the room lingered long after the clapping started. It was not just about music anymore, it was about courage, about truth, about the strength it takes to show yourself when the world expects you to fail. Daniel had given them more than a performance, he had given them a piece of his soul, and they knew it. As he stepped back from the piano, his heart lighter than it had ever been, he realized that the fear which had weighed on him all his life was gone. He had faced it and he had won, not by fighting, but by being true to himself. The ending of the song had been more than music. It had been a release, and as the applause thundered on, Daniel smiled softly, knowing that he would never again hide the part of himself that had just shone so brightly. The emotional ending was not just his. It belonged to everyone in that room because in those last notes, they had all remembered something they had once lost, and for that, they would never forget the quiet accountant who dared to play. The applause filled the hall like a storm. Daniel stood by the piano, his chest rising and falling. He could hardly believe what had just happened. For years he had hidden this part of himself, convinced it was something the world did not need to see. Yet here he was, the shy accountant who had stunned an entire crowd into silence and then lifted them into thunderous clapping. His hands trembled, but this time not from fear, from the rush of being seen, truly seen. As the crowd continued cheering, Daniel stepped back, unsure of what to do next. He wanted to disappear into the crowd, to slip away quietly, but something inside told him not to. He had earned this moment, and running from it would be like shutting the piano lid on his own heart. He bowed slightly, the way he had seen musicians bow on stages, and the applause grew louder still. Then the clapping began to soften. One by one the people lowered their hands, until the hall was filled again with a quiet hum of excitement. All eyes turned toward Mr. Harrison, the millionaire who had started this with a cruel dare. He sat frozen for a moment, then slowly rose from his chair. The crowd parted for him, as if they too knew something important was about to happen. Harrison's face was unreadable. His sharp eyes locked on Daniel. The smug smile was gone, replaced by something heavier, something no one in that room had ever seen from him before. He walked forward, his footsteps echoing, the weight of the moment pressing on every heart. Daniel's breath caught. What would his boss say? Would he dismiss it all as a trick? Would he laugh again and claim it was nothing? Or would he be angry that Daniel had stolen the attention of the evening? The room waited, 100 people holding their breath. Finally, Harrison stopped in front of the piano, his voice deep but softer than usual. "I owe you an apology." The word shocked the room. The guests exchanged surprised glances. Harrison never apologized, not to anyone, yet here he was, admitting fault in front of them all. He turned to the audience for a moment, his tone steady. I dared him as a joke. I thought we would laugh. But what you heard tonight was no joke. It was a gift. He looked back at Daniel, his eyes glinting. And I was wrong to mock it. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some nodding in agreement, others whispering in amazement. Daniel stood frozen, unsure how to respond. He had never imagined hearing such words from the man who ruled their office with fear. Then Harrison continued, I cannot let this talent stay hidden. Next month, our company is sponsoring a gala, the kind of event where leaders, artists, and even government officials gather. I want you to perform there, not as my employee, but as an artist. As the man you showed us tonight. The hall erupted again. This time not with clapping alone, but with gasps and excited chatter. People turned to each other, smiling, some even cheering Daniel's name. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. One moment he had been a quiet accountant mocked for sport, and now he was being offered a stage at one of the most important events of the year. He stared at Harrison, trying to see if this was another cruel trick. But there was no smirk, no sharpness, only sincerity. His throat tightened. Words stuck as he tried to speak. Finally he managed. I don't know what to say. His voice was soft. Almost breaking, Harrison gave a small nod. Say yes. Daniel looked around, the faces of his co-workers and strangers glowing with admiration. The weight of his mother's memory pressing warmly on his heart. She had always believed he should share his gift, and now here was the chance. The crowd began clapping again, chanting softly, urging him, and Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. He bowed his head once more, whispering, Then yes. The room erupted in applause louder than before. People rose to their feet, cheering, clapping, calling his name. Some even whistled with joy. The sound washed over him like a wave, and Daniel felt a warmth spread through his entire body. For the first time in so many years, he was not invisible. He was not just the quiet man at the corner desk. He was someone worth seeing. Harrison extended his hand, and Daniel hesitated, then took it. The handshake was firm, not between a boss and his worker, but between two men who understood that something had changed between them. The moment stretched, the crowd cheering around them, and Daniel knew that life would never be the same again. What had started as a cruel dare had turned into a moment of truth. Not just for him, but for everyone in the hall. They had all witnessed something rare, a talent born not of arrogance but of heart, and a powerful man humbled by it. Daniel stepped back, his chest rising with pride. The noise of the room ringing in his ears. The night had begun with fear, but now it ended with hope. The unexpected offer was not just a chance to play again, it was a door opening. A door he had been too afraid to even approach before. Now it stood wide open, waiting for him to walk through. The hall was still buzzing with energy long after the applause had faded. People gathered in small groups, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled warmly, as if they had been part of something rare and unforgettable. Daniel stood quietly by the piano, his hand still trembling, but this time it was not fear. It was the weight of everything that had just happened. For so long he had believed he was invisible, a man who counted numbers and signed forms, someone no one really noticed, yet in one night, he had shown a piece of himself that no one expected. The memory of his mother's words echoed in his heart. Never let fear decide for you, Daniel. And he realized now that she had been right all along. Fear had tried to silence him, but the music had set him free. Mr. Harrison still stood near him, the proud and arrogant mask gone from his face. He looked at Daniel not as an employee, not as someone beneath him, but as a man who had reminded him of something he had long forgotten. There was humility in his eyes, a softness that few had ever seen. You've taught me something tonight, he said quietly so only Daniel could hear. I spent years thinking money was the only thing that mattered, but you reminded me of the dreams I left behind. Thank you. Those words struck Daniel deeply. Never in his life had he imagined his boss, the man who ruled with sharp commands and mockery, would say such a thing. It wasn't just an offer for the gala anymore. It was an admission that music had power beyond anything wealth could buy. As the night went on, people came to Daniel, shaking his hand, praising him, some asking how long he had been playing, others telling him how much the song had moved them. He listened, humbled, each compliment both strange and wonderful. For years he had doubted himself. Now he saw with his own eyes that his gift mattered later. When the crowd began to thin and the night grew quieter, Daniel stepped outside into the cool air. The stars above sparkled faintly, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile without hesitation. He had not just survived the dare, he had turned it into something powerful, something beautiful. He thought about the gala ahead, about playing not for mockery but for respect. He thought about the people who had listened tonight and the way their eyes had softened. He thought about his mother, and a warmth spread in his chest as if she had been there. Listening too, proud of him inside the hall, Harrison lingered by the piano. His hand brushing over the keys, he looked lost in thought, remembering the boy he used to be, the one who once dreamed of playing. In Daniel's performance, he had seen not only talent but a reflection of his own lost path, and in that reflection came a painful but important truth. Money could buy the world, but it could not buy the soul that poured out through those keys. The lesson of the night was clear. To everyone who had been there, never judge someone by how quiet they seem. Never assume worth by position or title. Greatness often hides where you least expect it, and sometimes it only takes one moment of courage to bring it into the light. Daniel walked home that night with his heart lighter than ever before, the city lights glowing around him. People passed by without knowing what he had just done, and that was fine because he knew. He carried with him the sound of the applause, the faces filled with awe, the voice of his mother in every note he played, and most of all, the certainty that he would never again let fear keep him silent. For Harrison, the lesson lingered as well. He returned to his mansion filled with treasures and riches, but none of it felt as alive as the music he had heard tonight. He sat in silence, realizing that for all his wealth, he had been poor in ways that mattered. Daniel had reminded him that some gifts cannot be bought, only shared. The story of that night spread quietly through the company in the days that followed. People who had not been there listened with amazement to those who described it. "You should have seen him," they said. Daniel played like a professional, no, more than that. He played like someone who carried music in his soul. The tale grew, not of mockery but of respect, and Daniel found himself no longer invisible. The dare that was meant to humiliate him had instead revealed who he truly was, and it had humbled a millionaire, inspired a crowd, and brought back life to memories long buried. It was proof that one act of courage, one choice to rise instead of shrink, could change not only your own life, but the hearts of those around you. And so when Daniel sat at his piano again in his small apartment, the keys under his fingers, he no longer played in secret. He no longer played only for himself. He played for his mother, for the people who had listened, for the millionaire who had learned humility, and most of all for the boy he had once been, the boy who loved music without fear. The lesson remembered that night would never fade. Not for Daniel, not for Harrison, not for anyone in that hall. Sometimes the quietest voice carries the loudest truth, and when it finally dares to be heard, it can leave even the richest man in the room stunned.